Hello YouTube, going to be going over how to convert an E24 or an E28 as well, conversion from an automatic to a manual transmission. This model here is a 1985 635 CSI. It is a Euro model, but I'm going to be going over the steps to do a conversion from an auto to a manual transmission. There's a website or two out there to talk about, to guide you through it, but I thought I'd do a quick video. Go over the parts of what you need to do the conversion. What you'll need is a parts car, obviously. These parts are from a 1987 535 IS. Same chassis basically, just a four-door version of the E24. I think any 80s model pretty much will suffice to do the conversion. So some of the things you'll need obviously for the conversion is the manual transmission. This one here is this transmission is a 260/6. You'll get it from the parts car. Other things you'll need: the transmission brace, the support in the rear. You'll need the drive shaft. You'll need the shift linkage. You'll need the shift boot. Believe it or not, that'll just slip right into your automatic shifter hole in your console. You'll also need the pedal box and the flywheel. And while you have the parts out, you want to do some basic maintenance, which I've already done. For the transmission itself, replace the flex disc in the rear, or it's also called a Guibo. I replaced the seals, the input shaft seal and the rear output shaft seal, as well as the seal that's on the shift linkage there. I also put a new slave cylinder on it with hydraulic line. See on the side here. Changed out the fluid, obviously. I did not change out the bearings, the front and rear bearings. You have to break it apart to do that. I don't know if the transmission is any good. I'm assuming it is. Bad assumption, but we'll see how it works. If the bearings are bad, I'll obviously have to pull it back out and change out the bearings. But power washed it, cleaned it back up. Just swapped out the parts. Other rebuilds you want to do while it's out. For the drive shaft itself, there's a center support bearing. I had this one rebuilt, this drive shaft rebuilt, and they put a center support bearing on it for me. What else? For the pedal box, it was in pretty good shape. Just did some basic sanding, spray painted it black, got some new stock rubber pads for it, put a new master cylinder on it, as well as the hydraulic line out of the front there. When I removed the pedal box, I actually cut that clutch line to remove it from the donor car. So what I did was I just picked one up at AutoZone to fit it, and that'll go. That front line will go to the hydraulic line there on the transmission. Or I'm sorry, the hydraulic line that's attached to the slave cylinder. You'll want to probably have the flywheel at least resurfaced and checked and balanced. I went ahead and got a clutch kit for the entire thing. This is a clutch kit that fits this that model year. I think an M6 clutch will actually fit as well, but I think there's a little bit higher clutch pressure, which this is a stock engine, so I'm not really concerned about too much high horsepower or whatnot. So I just got a stock Sachs clutch with pressure plate, with a throwout bearing and the not the throwout bearing, yeah, the throwout bearing and the pilot bearing. And went ahead and had the flywheel and clutch pressure plate balanced together at a local machine shop. While I'm in there, I'm also going to be doing the rear main seal. If you've got the flex plate or flywheel off, you might as well do the rear main seal while you're in there. So I'm going to be doing that as well. You'll need the hydraulic line. It's a low pressure line that goes from the brake master cylinder down into there's a port on the master cylinder on the clutch box that goes to the firewall that the fluid feeds into. So you need to get some new, either use the donor car, or just, it's pretty cheap to get a new one. You'll want to get the donor car's rubber boot around the shifter was all messed up, so I got a new one there. And usually people will change out all the bushings and the selector joint from the donor car. This part here, the rear support for their shift linkage, their shift rods, I took it from the donor car, but I think Turner Motorsports and maybe a few others have like a billet one. But I just pulled this one out of the donor and burnt out the old rubber bushing in there and put my own polyurethane bushing from Garagistic in there. New selector joint for the front, and I believe that's it. So those are the parts needed to do a conversion from automatic to manual. I won't be filming the entire process, just basics. Anything I run across and difficulties in removing something, or if I find something that I need, I'll be pointing it out to you guys. I think that's it. I didn't have bolts from the donor car, from the flywheel, so I went ahead and just purchased some from Bolt Depot. And I believe that's it. I'll go ahead and get started and film progress as I go. Before getting started on the transmission swap at the 635 CSI, I had the car dynoed. Because the long legs, or the 307 gears in the rear, there's a limit on how fast the dyno could spin. So I did 2 pulls with second gear, and these are the 2 here. So basically 156 horsepower. And I tried one run in third gear, but I limited the RPMs obviously. That's why this one looks kind of funny. It actually downshifted to second gear, but got 162 horsepower out of third gear. So I guess there's a little gear ratio advantage there for third gear. So let's just call it approximately 160 horsepower at the wheels. And then after I do the transmission swap with the manual transmission, I'll take it back and get it dynoed. Alright guys, now that the car is up on a lift, I thought I'd walk you through the game plan. Looks like we're going to have to at least loosen the sway bar. Let's take this off here, these 2 mounting points, swing it out of the way, just enough to clear the back side of the block here, and then it looks like it'll clear the strut brace here. So we'll just loosen these 2 here, or take those out, swing it forward, and then start taking stuff apart. Take off the exhaust and maybe some of the shielding, and we'll go from there. Alright, as you can see, the car's up on the jack, on the lift rather, and remove the exhaust, the heat shield. Something I want to talk about before moving on is the drive shaft. I don't believe I mentioned this before, but there's 2 different lengths of drive shaft. For this model, this is an 85, manufactured in I think September of 84, which means there may be some differences between pre and post 85 models. There are 2 different size drive shafts. One is 1522 millimeters and one is 1566. For this conversion on this 85 model with a 260/6 transmission, it requires a 1566 millimeter drive shaft. So just keep that in mind. There's 2 different sizes depending on what transmission you're using and what chassis model you're working on. So keep that in mind. I've also got the car up on jack stands, remove the rear wheels so I can easily turn the drive shaft if needed. I've got the sway bar off front and pulled forward so I can have room to the bell housing area. And I believe that's it. Okay, progress report time. I was able to remove the drive shaft okay. The only surprise I had, or unexpected, was I had to remove the transmission brace here. Supported the front of the transmission with a bottle jack. Obviously removed the bolts, just so I can get to the back side of these from the drive shaft, to get to the back side of these bolts here. Couldn't do it with this brace in place, so again, support the transmission, remove this, get the back of the bolts, turn the drive shaft, put the transmission in park and neutral, rotate as you need to get all the nuts off. and then afterwards just put the brace back on to hold it in place while you do the front of the transmission. Other things done, obviously drain the fluid, remove the coolant lines for the transmission, dipstick tube, coolant lines. These coolant lines for the transmission go up through the driver's side wheel well, across the front. You can see those gold colored lines over there. They go up into the engine bay, up through the passenger side, and into the cooler up front. So undid all that, drained the fluid, started to remove these bolts here. You'll need a specialty, I wouldn't say specialty, a little odd, 6-point star socket to get these bolts off here. BMW uses these star bolts for holding in the transmission, and a couple other bolts as well. But this is an E10. Make sure you pick up one of those if you need. Also, something a little different with regards to the torque converter. So this plate here, so I can hold this right here. This plate here is a cover that goes over the front of this, the bottom of this oil pan here. Just remove these bolts. There's 4 more that go in this way, 2 and 2, and I just slid it out of the way. You could remove this brace. There's 2 bolts here and 2 bolts on the other side. You can remove this and maybe have a little more access into there to get this out of the way, but I just rotated it as needed. Torque converter, bolts from the other side, from this side here. What you'll have to do is, what I did was came in through here, and in this area right here, you can see the back side is where the bolts are. In fact, there's one is up there as well. But basically, just can open end wrench here, open end wrench, and get the 3 bolts that hold the back side of the torque converter in. Okay, last update for the day. Obviously, the transmission's out. It's been about 6 hours overall. Took a little break for lunch. It's the first Saturday of football season, so I actually went inside, watched a little football as well. The hardest part is absolutely the bolts on the top of the bell housing, up top of the engine there. My ladder definitely got a workout today. Tried to tilt the engine forward, then backward, and just really to get at those top bolts, it was very difficult. But in the end, it just took a little time, got it done. Like I said, my ladder got a workout today. These are the bolts, the 4 on the bottom here. These are approximately the positions of where they came off the bell housing, with the ones up top coming from the top of the bell housing. They're all 13 mils, except for the bottom 4, which are the E10s, and the 2 outer ones, the big ones on the outer side, those are 16 mils. But everything came out fine. I had to actually disconnect some stuff from the engine bay. You'll see 2 of our, let's see what they're called. I guess they're flywheel sensors. So that actually had to come out. Had to go up top, undo those, as well as the kickdown cable, which you'll see is on the back side here. Took all those off to be able to lower it away. I don't have a transmission jack, like I said. I just basically lowered the lift down onto my toolbox and then lifted the car back up. Overall work, probably about 4 hours of work. The most time consuming was absolutely getting those top bell housing bolts out. Probably took me at least an hour to get those 4 up top. But anyway, just took time. I'll end it for the day. Start up tomorrow and put the new transmission back in. Day 2, little tip. Before you start this project, get a big bag of kitty litter. I came into the garage this morning and looked like a murder scene went off in my garage. So all the ATF fluid drained out of, I guess, the torque converter with the pump and the rest of the system. I drained it yesterday, but obviously there was a lot still in there. Anyway, before you start the project, get a big bag of kitty litter and be prepared to use it. Before we get going this morning, just thought I'd lay out the differences between the 2 transmissions. You'll see here, try to put tail shaft to tail shaft. You'll see how much different the lengths of the automatic transmission is. Anyway, also thought I'd point out these sensors in here. These correspond to the teeth where the flywheel and flex plate go. And there's also one on the side which I guess is top dead center. And so this will go into here, and this inner one detects this bump, and this outer one here detects, I guess, the teeth on the flywheel here. So before we get started, before we put any of this back in, I thought I'd show you the difference. Flex plate, here's the tooth here. So I don't know if this makes any difference, but probably does at some point. Make sure this tooth, when you take this flex plate off, make sure this tooth corresponds to when you put the flywheel on. Make sure that bump on the corresponding flywheel is in the same position, just in case it matters. I'm not sure if it does, but it makes sense. So anyway, game plan today is to get the Getrag mounted in here, and probably go on the inside and start removing some of the shifter stuff after that. Okay, just took the flex plate off. I guess, forget what I said earlier. The key was here, but actually there's a dowel here on this backside of this crankshaft. So you can only get the flex plate or the flywheel back on one way. Just use this dowel. So no need to mark anything. This dowel will index you to the correct orientation. Okay, quick update. Had the flywheel in, torqued the flywheel bolts to 77 foot-pounds. Flywheel kept turning as most people have it, but what I did was I just put this ratchet strap around the teeth here, and it worked perfectly. It didn't move at all. So if you need to do that, please do. Next, I'll be putting the pressure plate and clutch in, torquing those down, and moving on to getting the transmission in. Okay, transmission is in. It did take a while. I'd recommend, if you have a transmission jack, use it. I thought since I had a lift, it would be a little easier. However, it did take quite a while crawling out and crawling back in, lifting the car up and down with the transmission on my toolbox. But anyway, it's in. Other than just maneuvering in and out, trying to get the transmission in, it wasn't too bad. Clutch went on fine, pressure plate went on fine. The only strange thing, well, not strange, but I didn't expect, was these bolts here. You notice there's 216 and 213 left. There's actually the bungs, or the tabs on the manual transmission are actually about a ½ inch longer in two areas. Look at, trying to see if I can get a good light here for you. There's one up here. The 16 mil needs to be about a ½ inch longer to fit there. This one as well. The bolt that's down here actually just tips out right here, so it needs to be about another at least ½ inch longer. And there's one on the top of the block and transmission bell housing that it's a lot shorter. It's about this long. So these bolts that I have here are actually too long. So I need to get 3 more 16 mils, 2 about ½ inch longer, and 1 ½ inch shorter. Other than that, all the other 13 mil spots are taken up, and still 2 left over. So all the holes are filled. Other than that, it's in. And then next step is to go inside and remove this transmission shifter and the actual cable itself, and then we'll go from there. Okay, the game plan for the inside is to obviously remove the console. This all is connected, this whole piece here. So there's a couple bolts around the sides, and this, after remove the radio pulls out. That all comes out from here below, essentially from here to here. All this comes out. You can just pop this out, I believe. That comes off, just pops off. And then under here to actually hold the shifter on, I believe there's 2 sheet metal screws. So we'll take all this off. I'll probably remove the steering wheel, maybe the seat, just to have a little better access. Everything underneath the car is done. I say done. The drive shaft and exhaust isn't on, but everything for now, I left the drive shaft off so I can actually have a little better access to the shifter linkage. When I put the manual shifter linkage in, it'll just be easier underneath without the drive shaft there. You'll see it later as I think that's it. For those of you that have keen eye, you'll notice that this is not the original steering wheel. I took the ugly 4-post steering wheel out and actually replaced it with a European model E30, I believe. Other than that, after the shifter and console comes out and I get all the linkage done, I'll probably finish up below, put the console back on, and then start with the pedal box. For the pedal box, this comes out. It's actually connected to a bracket underneath here, and I'll replace it with obviously the manual brake and clutch assembly that I showed earlier. It usually has a piece here. My car didn't come with it when I got it. It doesn't really bother me though. This has to come out. This piece, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. This drops out of the way, and there are 2 bolts on either side of the column here that will drop the column a little bit, give it a little more room. After that's out, I'll go ahead and start removing the 8 bolts for the pedal box assembly, but I'll continue with them. I know everyone watching this video is probably thinking the same thing, and I'm probably going to get a number of questions and comments below. Everybody's probably wondering where that dang Heckscheibe button is. Oh, it's right there. It's Heckscheibe. Okay, the automatic transmission shifter is out. I know it looks like a mess in here, but it's really not that bad. What I had to do was first actually remove the center console for the emergency brake here. There's only 2 bolts. I think there's 7 mil in the back. Take that off, and it all slides off pretty easy. To get the console out, you actually have to slide it forward, which the front lip here was hitting on the console for the emergency brake. So anyway, I just removed that. Removed a few bolts. There's like 2 on the side, and there's 2 more on the side over here for the console itself. To get the shifter surround out, this just pops right out real easy. And there's actually 2 screws. There's a screw here, and there's a screw which interacts with that over here on the console, and there's a screw back here that holds the console to the actual floor. I'm sorry, to the emergency brake console here. To get the actual shifter out, once you pull the console out, you actually have to lift it up and out and bring it away. You have to disconnect the switches for the windows, which are here, and they actually go in these slots here. So I just popped them out and pulled the corresponding wires from the back side. Pull those out. There's a wire here that goes to the ashtray light, as well as the ashtray cigarette lighter here. So that just pops out of the back of this here. Really simple. Obviously I pulled out the radio and pulled out the radio bits, and the trip computer, which is there, just pulled out the back side of that. So pulled all that, this, and these out for the switches for the windows. Pull those out of there, pulls out, and then there are 3 mounting points for the shifter console. There's one back in the back where there's a stud you can see here. Just remove this nut, and there are 2 sheet metal screws in the front which correspond to these 2 holes here, and just pull it out. Just this whole cable here is the automatic transmission cable. This will probably go back to the automatic transmission controller, which is I believe back here somewhere, and I'll remove that as well. But anyway, came out fairly easy. It took only about 15-20 minutes to get that out. I think that's really about it. Not too bad. Next step. So thinking about next couple steps, try to plan ahead. I'm going to go ahead and put the console back in. The reason being is because the shifter, which is going to be coming up through here, will probably impede the movement or getting this console back in, because of it'll probably hit right here, which is where the automatic shifter was kind of hitting as I was taking it out. So I'll put this back in while I've got no interference, and then put the rubber boot on here, and then stick the manual shifter back up through. Also, as I was looking at the wires, I noticed this wire was over here attached to the automatic transmission. These are the same colors as the reverse cable on the manual transmission. So I believe this is just a manual backup light indicator. So I went ahead and removed that from the automatic trans cable, and I'll pass the wire from the manual transmission switch up through here and connect it to here for a reverse. And that's it. I'll stop here. Okay, the console's in. Went together fairly easy. Put the radio back together, all the buttons for the windows, ashtray, everything. Now what I'm going to do is actually lift the car back up and get done with the stuff underneath the car. So what I'll do is right there you can get a good look at it. The hole in the tunnel, I'll put the rubber boot over the shifter here, and then go lift it up and go underneath the car and continue with the manual shift linkage on the back of the transmission and feed it up through the hole. And from there I'll probably just put the drive shaft back in, exhaust, heat shield, and be done with everything underneath the car. Okay, the car is obviously up on the lift now. We're looking underneath transmission. Here's the hole that the automatic transmission shifter came out of. This was the cutout for the transmission, the kickdown cable essentially, or not the kickdown, but the gear selector cable that actually shifted the selector on the automatic transmission to put it in drive and park. That went through this hole here, which came through this. So what I'll do is I'll use this to feed my reverse cable and light, or up through here into the cable loom, or the wire loom up in here. So I'll put that in there. A little bit about the shifter linkage itself, for those that don't know. This is the boot, the rubber boot that'll go up through the cab. It'll go up through like this. You'll feed this cable in there first, this little plastic thing. Put it in here like this, and then you'll pull this from inside the cabin. And what it does is it actually, you can see there's another plastic ring in there. It'll actually pull it up into this groove here, So that's how that works. The gear selector itself, the rear carrier, it has 2 slots here, on the front side, and a nut on the back. That corresponds to this here, these 2 prongs with this nut. I'm sorry, this hole here. And so what you do is put the carrier here, bolt that in, and that's the support for the rear selector. Let's see, the front Delrin grooves here, or that goes into this on top of the transmission here. And what it does, you take this and you put it through this hole and this hole here, and it actually slides in this little clip on this, see that clip right there? It'll actually grab this ear of the transmission there. So I actually call this the bitch clip, for those that don't know, because it's a bitch to get on and off. It slides in through that hole and clips onto that ear up in there. And so that's what holds the front side in. This bottom side here actually goes to the actual gear selector, this thing here. It's called the gear selector joint, and that's actually what switches your gears. That top one up here just supports it to the transmission. This one actually, you can kind of, that's shifting in and out of gears right there. So that's what actually shifts the gear, is when you turn this, it shifts this back and forth, side to side and back and forth to select your gears. So that's how that works. So what I'll do is I'll put this up in here, feed this through here, get the bitch clip in, put the front selector joint in there, and feed it up through the hole. And I'll be back. Okay, the gear selector is in. Get the bitch clip in front of the carrier there. Put the C clip on this rod, which is through the selector joint here. Got this mounted, the rear carrier. I actually had to loosen the 4 training support bolts here, or nuts, to lower it just a little bit, in order to get that top of that bitch clip over and clipped on. But it's on. I fed the reverse indicator switch wire up through the loom. I haven't quite pulled it up all the way through. I'll do that when I'm up in the cab. But I'll go ahead and put the drive shaft on, exhaust, heat shield, and be done underneath the car. Okay, everything underneath the car is done. The drive shaft went in, the heat shield and the exhaust both went on just fine, no surprises. The only thing I would caution is against, or to let you know that the drive shaft itself is a two-piece drive shaft. So when you tighten up your flex joint there, when you tighten up these bolts, and then you tighten up these at the end of the drive shaft, there's a slip yoke right about here that expands. So don't tighten up your center support bearing until you've got both ends tightened up, because it'll allow that yoke to slide a little bit before you lock it down. It'll put too much stress on your center support bearing if you tighten it down before you get the two ends done. But everything's done. Everything under here is complete, except once I get the pedal box assembly mounted inside and the master cylinder, I'll plumb it to the hydraulic line to the slave here, and we'll be done. Okay, car's on the ground. Back inside the car, you can see how the shift lever comes up through. Got the shift boot in, the rubber shift boot at least, and the switch for the reverse and on the transmission. And this is from this wire over here that I disconnected from the automatic transmission. So these two to go together, put them down in there. Put the shift boot on. I had the person that did the seats redo the shift boot as well. Same leather. I'll put that on there. It actually just snaps right in. You can see the little knobs there. They snap in, and the only thing left is to put the shift knob on. The only indicator that this was an automatic transmission, if you see this hole right here for the screw, that's actually from the automatic console. They actually put a screw here from the factory to hold this in. So that would be the only residual indicator that this was an automatic car. So I'll get this buttoned up and start working on underneath the dash here. I'll start removing the steering column and getting the steering box assembly out. I'm sorry, pedal assembly out. Okay, I'm underneath the dash, giving you a good look of what it looks like under here. Looks like a mess, but it's really not that bad. These cables I just pulled out of the steering column wire loom here. It looks pretty bad, pretty daunting, but don't worry about it. This just comes out. These all unplug from this connector here and this connector here. Don't worry about getting them mixed up. They're keyed for. They all look different. You cannot get them mixed up, so don't worry about it. Just undo them and plug them in back to the air receptacle later when you're done. What I did was also remove this nut back on the steering column. Remove this nut, or at least loosen it so it'll slide off this spline. Let's see if I can show you. See how it moves. So what's going to happen is once I remove these two support, well, this nut here, or this bolt rather, and this bolt on this side, this steering column will slide off with this shaft all the way, and we'll have this out of our way to get to the pedal box assembly. Pedal box assembly. From there, we'll remove the clip for the brake master cylinder back here. We'll just unclip it from this. I've already undone the brake switch here, and the 4 bolts up front, and there's 4 bolts up top, and this whole pedal assembly will come out. Okay, steering column's out. It was very easy. Like I said, these 2 bolts that were holding it in. There was actually one more hidden back here. I had to remove that as well. Again, it took about a minute to get this out. These 2, this one, loosen that, it slid right out. No problem. Next is the brake connection with the master cylinder. It's a clip right here. We'll just take a screwdriver, we'll pull that out, and then we'll start working on these bolts back in here and up here, and that should be it. And then we'll start working on the installing the manual pedal assembly. You can see the automatic here, standard transmission on the far side. The only obvious difference is the clutch. And you see how the clutch master cylinder here, the clutch master cylinder actually feeds to the firewall. So this part here will feed through. And there's a grommet, there's a hole in the firewall. Just go ahead and remove the grommet and feed the master cylinder through. There is another clutch, clutch switch here, which actually is used to kill the cruise control. So there's a wire in the wire loom. We'll connect to that, but I'll show you once we get there. Other than that, exactly the same. Put it back in just like this one came out. You'll notice there's a hole here in the brake pedal, actually in both of them, where you feed through your socket to get this back nut back in the back side over here, if you can see it. So use that to get through the back nut. And this is our spring for our gas pedal. So I'll take this off here and put it on the other one and install it. Okay, first problem of the build. If you look at the back of the pedal box and the back wall there, you'll see that it's flush, but look where my bolts are up top. These holes here and here are supposed to line up with these two holes here on the bracket. And if I put it flush against the firewall, it's not even close. And it's a good inch off. So what I'm going to have to do is take my automatic bracket for my pedal assembly, which obviously lines up with these holes because it came out of here, and just remove this long bolt through the clutch and the brake pedal, and remove this from the from the manual box assembly, pedal assembly, and put it on my old automatic pedal assembly. Just a little deconstruction of my old one and rebuilding this the pedals into my old bracket itself, and then it'll fit fine. A little hiccup. I'll go rebuild now. Okay, pedal box is in. What I did was I just took the old brace from my automatic pedal assembly, removed this one long bolt. I believe it's a 17mm. Just took that one bolt off of the old the other manual pedal box assembly, removed the two pedals, and put them both on this old brace here. It worked. It was 2 minutes work. It was real quick. The only other thing I had to do was this brace, this little bracket here, to hold the clutch switch, which tells the cruise control that you've pressed the clutch and to disengage. Everything else was very smooth. The master cylinder is actually held on by two 10mm bolts. The old pedal box, or the manual pedal box, actually had 2 cap nuts to hold it on, so I just had to find 2 nuts to hold the bolts on, which hold the master cylinder in. And you see right there, it feeds through the firewall. I'll put a grommet on it to keep the air out and whatnot. So it's in. Well, I say it's in. I've got 1 bolt holding it in. I'll put the other 3 bolts in and the 4 nuts in the back, and attach the brake master cylinder to the pedal with its little clip, and be done. Pedal box is in. Everything looks good, fits right. Now comes the part of the project where you have to do a little bit of wiring. I say a very little bit. The first thing is the car, the ECU thinks it's an automatic, and it won't start the car. It won't let you start the car without the car being in park. So if you get the automatic wiring harness here, you'll notice there are 2 brown wires on the back here. They're the 2 top right, where my thumb is. The 2 brown wires in the back. You'll need to jumper them so the car thinks that you're in park. That way you can start the car. What I did was I took one of these splice connectors and drilled out both sides so the wires can pass right through. And I just spliced them together that way. But now the car will start because the car, or the ECU, thinks it's in park, and it'll let you start the car. Second part is wiring of the, I say wiring, but it's connecting the wiring harness for the clutch switch, which is back here. This is in the wiring loom already. What the factory does, they just put a little jumper on here like this to essentially just have this all the way on all the time. So what you do is just dig up in here. It's actually connected to this part of your wiring harness coming from your column here. This outer one, it's actually connected to that, so just pull it around, find it, take this off, and connect it to your switch here. Very easy. Okay, we're underneath the hood now. Next step is to get fluid from the brake master cylinder into the clutch master cylinder underneath the dash. The way these old BMWs use their clutch systems, they actually use the same brake fluid for the clutch system. Instead of having a separate clutch reservoir and brake reservoir, they share one. To get fluid from the brake reservoir through the firewall into the master cylinder for the clutch, you can see down in here on the side of that, right here, there's a little nub on the side of the master cylinder that you take that corresponding little, pull that off. You're going to put your tube on there, and then take the other side of the tube and feed it through a grommet through the firewall down here. And actually, if you look closely, you can actually see the shiny front of the master cylinder for the clutch down there. So that's it, coming through the firewall. So you want to feed this tube through the firewall into there's a nub on the nipple on the clutch master cylinder underneath the dash. Just feed this through the firewall into that. That's it. Okay, I'm back underneath the car. What I'd planned to do was actually put a hard line from the master cylinder to this flex line, which is the back side of the slave cylinder here. The hard line to get back up to the master, it's kind of very difficult to see, but it's way back up and past my finger, past over there. That's where the master cylinder is. And to get a hard line on that and a wrench up in there, there is no way. So what I'm going to do is actually I ordered another hydraulic line from ECS, and I'm just going to use this line here to plug into the back of the master and then feed this in down through here and let it hang and use a hard line, a short hard line to connect these two ends here. It's going to be like this essentially when I get done. Alright, so I'm going to go back up top. I'm going to take the master out and thread this in and then feed the master with this through the firewall and let this hang down so I can connect it to here. Hopefully it'll be a little easier. Okay, the car is done. The last step was to hook that line from the master cylinder to the slave cylinder here. What I ended up doing is I went in the cab, took out the master cylinder, plugged in the soft line from ECS, and you can kind of see it way back up in there. It's the red line, and brought it around and actually plumbed into a hard line from a local parts store. So that's how I ended up getting it. Since it's so tight up in there, there was no way I can get a wrench to plumb any hard lines there. So I just, like I said, hooked the soft line to it, fed it through the firewall, grabbed the end over here, and then plugged the hard line into the soft line here. That's it. Car is done. I'll bleed the system and take it for a spin. All right, that's it. Project's over, transmission's in, everything's working great. Here are the results. Dyno tests with the manual transmission. About an average of 185, 186 horsepower. Peak torque of about 220. Good pickup. Here's the original with the automatic transmission. On average about 100 and let's call it 58 horsepower with the manual. I'm sorry, the automatic. So a good 25 horsepower pickup, which is a little over 15% increase in horsepower, with nothing else but a manual transmission switch. Alright, hope you enjoyed the video.